Hey, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about reinforcement systems. The presentation that I'm going to share today talks about some general systems and strategies that you can use for either individual students or for groups of students. It's definitely not all-encompassing, but it will likely help you to better implement systems that you're already familiar with, and it might introduce you to some systems that you haven't implemented before. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So the presentation is called Reinforcement Systems. I will go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Jenna French, and I'm a behavior analyst with Northeast Metro 916. I do most of my work with the consultation team, but I do work in some of our member districts, and I support a couple of our programs as well. Today, I'm going to go over brief behavior basics. If you've watched any of my other trainings, it's not going to be any new information for you, but I like to review it at the beginning of the majority of my trainings just so that we're all on the same page and we're kind of setting the tone for understanding and interpreting behavior. We will talk about how reinforcement works. Some of this will be information that I've shared previously, and some of it will be new information. So it'll expand a little bit more on the concept of reinforcement. Then I'll go into talking about the different types of reinforcement systems. We're going to start from simple and move to complex. I will also talk a little bit about choosing systems that work based on the student's needs, the behaviors that you're trying to change, whatever the case may be. We'll touch base on some staff training and just some tips there to help get some consistency across staff that might be working with the student. And then I will also talk about fidelity checks. All right, behavior basics. There are the ABCs that we want to look for when we're looking at behavior. The antecedent, which is what happens before the behavior. So the example here, the road is icy. The behavior, which is what the individual does, and it must be observable. The example here with the road being icy, I drive slower than usual. That's my behavior. And then the consequence, what happened after the behavior. Example here, I don't get in an accident. So there's the antecedent, behavior, and consequence sequence there. Why are the ABCs important? I talk about these a lot because without the ABCs, it's really hard for us to identify the purpose that the behavior serves for the individual. So the ABCs lead us to the function. So the example, if I identify the function of my own behavior based on the ABCs in this example, I was able to avoid getting in a car accident while driving on an icy road. There are 4 functions of behavior. I will briefly go over those: escape avoidance, attention, access to a tangible or preferred activity, and then automatic, which is more commonly known as sensory. But automatic behavior, again, is something that we can give ourselves, so we don't need somebody else to give to us. How reinforcement works. So if a behavior is reinforced, it means that there is a consequence that followed the behavior that makes it more likely to occur. So think reinforcement increases the future likelihood of behavior. There are different types of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, so that's adding desirable things that the individual wants. There's negative reinforcement, which is removing or taking away undesirable things. And then there's automatic reinforcement. It doesn't require the presence of another person, it just feels good to the individual. So also known as sensory. It can be positive or negative. Some different examples of those types of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement could be receiving a paycheck, ordering a meal at a restaurant and receiving the meal, receiving a compliment on an outfit, flipping on a light switch, and then laughter after telling a joke. Examples of negative reinforcement are turning up the thermostat when it's cold, taking aspirin for a headache, giving a crying baby a pacifier. That negatively reinforces our behavior because it stops the crying. And closing the blinds before taking a nap and stopping at a stop sign. And then some examples of automatic reinforcement include scratching your arm when it itches, taking deep breaths, especially when you're stressed out, stretching, rubbing your head when you have a headache, and fidgeting. Those are all some examples. So to go into a little bit more depth about reinforcement, one of the other ways that we can make reinforcement effective is based on the schedule that we select to provide the reinforcement for the behavior. We can give reinforcement based on time or responses. So interval schedules are based on time, so a time interval. We use this when we want a behavior to be sustained over a specific period of time. So maybe we want, every 5 minutes that a student is on task, we're going to provide reinforcement. Maybe they get a token for every 5 minutes they're on task. So that would be considered a fixed interval. It's predictable. It's going to happen every 5 minutes. You can also give reinforcement on like a general average of time. That's called a variable interval schedule. And that's where maybe it's an average of 5 minutes, but each interval will vary. So it might be 2 minutes and then provided at 4 minutes and then at 7 minutes, but then back to 3 minutes. And then over that period of time, the variable ratio schedule does average out to about 5 minutes, but the actual intervals vary. For responses, that's what we call ratio schedules. And that's used when we want specific instances of behavior to be reinforced. So the example here, maybe we provide a token after every 3 math problems completed. That would be a fixed ratio schedule. So it's every 3 problems, very predictable. But we could also give it on a variable ratio schedule. Maybe we're averaging about every 3 math problems, but we give one after 1 problem, another after 2 problems, another after 4 problems, and then another after 3 problems, etc. The nice thing about the variable ratio schedule is that the unpredictability tends to increase and sustain the behavior because the student never knows when the reinforcement's going to happen. It could happen right away, it could happen after a little while, but we balance that out by varying the number of responses that's required. When we are identifying reinforcers for students and reinforcement schedules, there are a few things that we want to consider. Reinforcement should be immediate. So regardless of what schedule you choose, once you've reached that criteria, whether it's the end of an interval or the number of responses that the student has provided, the reinforcement should immediately follow that. The reinforcer or reward that is selected for the student should be something that the student wants and that is meaningful to the student. We want to make sure that they enjoy, whatever the reward is, whether it's playing a game with a preferred staff or getting to have just some independent drawing time or a specific prize. All of that should be something that is desirable for the student. Reinforcement should also be worth it. The amount, the quality, the duration of reinforcement that we provide for a behavior should match the level of effort that a student puts forth to earn that reward. So if it's a behavior or a task that requires a lot of effort, we want that reward to be equal in value for the student. And then the reinforcement should also be something that the student gets only after the desired behavior occurs. So if it's something that the student has free access to all day long, it's not going to be an effective reinforcer. Why would you work for something if you can get it for free later on? So making sure that there's that contingency in place and that it's not something that the student accesses all the time, because then they'll get sick of it and it'll lose its value as far as motivating them to complete tasks. Now we'll go into the different types of reinforcement systems. Today I'm going to talk about first then, task strips, individualized token systems, individualized point sheets, program-wide token systems, program-wide point sheets, and I will also talk a little bit about group contingencies. So the first one is the first then. The goal with the first then is to establish the concept of first work, then preferred activity or item. When you would want to use this type of system is when a student needs frequent or immediate access to reinforcement. They have a hard time waiting, or they have a hard time understanding that they will get that something good later on down the road. So you need to build in that immediacy first. It's also helpful to use when with students who are working on completing one task at a time. So breaking it down, first task, then preferred. And you can also use it with students who struggle to complete non-preferred or more difficult tasks. So you might want to reserve this strategy for a particularly difficult or non-preferred task, making sure that the reward or the reinforcer that they receive during the then part is highly motivating and maybe something that they don't have access to over the course of the day. So what you need to create a first then, or to start using a first then with a student, is a first then visual. Sometimes it's on like some cardstock and it's laminated with Velcro so you can interchange pictures, but you can also make one by just drawing it out on a piece of paper or using Post-it notes, a first Post-it note and then Post-it note. So you can do some prep work and have those boards created, or you can use them on the fly as well. You might want to have a visual of preferred items with words, pictures, or both, depending on the student. You may also want a visual of the task with words, pictures, or both. So again, you can pre-make this or you can write it down. And then you may also want a timer. The timer will be helpful for transitioning the student back from the preferred activity. So maybe they do, the 5 math problems, then they get their reward. Maybe it's listening to music. So you set a timer for 5 minutes or however long you've decided. Then once the timer goes off, that's the cue to return back to the first then and see what the next task is going to be. Here are some examples of first then boards. So the one on the left has first work, then iPad. It's got the words and the pictures. Similarly, there's the first then or first next then, which you can expand to as the student is showing success with the first then, and then a variety of activities or tasks, and then preferred items and activities. The next reinforcement system I'll talk about is task strips. The goal with task strips is to increase the number of tasks a student completes before earning reinforcement. So again, when we're using first then, and say we have a student that we need to use a first then with over the course of the entire day, that is really hard for staff to manage for the entire day, along with the schedules of maybe other students or just different things that happen throughout the day that might make implementing that over the course of the whole day difficult. So as students are showing success with a first then, that might be an indication that you could start increasing the number of tasks that they do before they get that reinforcement. So a task strip, again, is a visual of how many things need to be completed before they get that reward. When you would use this with students who need to increase independence with task completion, students who are transitioning from a first then, which is what I talked about, and students who are learning to complete tasks in a sequence. So maybe there's a specific sequence that they need to complete in order for that task to be completed, and then they receive the reinforcer after that. Materials you'll need for a task strip are like the strip with the number of boxes, so about 3 to 5 boxes on there. It could be laminated with Velcro. The boxes could be numbered or have a specific task pictured in each box. And then you'll also want to have visuals of the preferred items activities with and activities with words, pictures, or both. Here are some examples of task strips. So there are some that you can flip open, and then as they complete them, they close it to show that they're finished with that task. There are other ones where they might match numbers, and so there are a couple different variations there. The next reinforcement system I'll talk about is an individualized token system. The goal here is to increase a specific behavior for an individual student. When you would want to use this, anytime you want to increase a specific behavior with a student, or when students who struggle with delay in reinforcement and need that tangible to see their progress. So here what you'll need is a target behavior or goal that is clearly defined so that all staff can reinforce it consistently. You'll need tokens, and that can be in the form of raffle tickets, bingo chips. I've seen programs that use dollars or Velcro pictures if it's like an actual board. You'll need a location for the tokens to be stored once the student earns them. So it could be a jar, a bag, it could be an actual token board. And then you'll need the corresponding visuals. And that would be as needed, whether it's a behavior expectation visual, an I'm working for visual, anything to help remind them what the expectation is and then what they're earning as a result of meeting that expectation by earning tokens. Here are some examples of token systems. So there's the board of I am working for, and then there's also a jar that you could have it marked at different spaces within the jar so that they can see how close they're getting to earning that reward. The next reinforcement system is the individualized point sheet. That again is to increase a specific behavior for a student. When you would use this, you would use it with students who are able to tolerate the delay in reinforcement, so they can look at their sheet, they can talk about it, get that feedback, but the reinforcement won't be provided until they've reached the criteria or they've gotten to a certain point in their schedule where they can look at their points and see how much they've earned. You might also want to use this with students who are able to participate in a discussion about their behavior and receive that feedback. What you'll need for this system is a point sheet with target behaviors that are clearly defined. You'll also need scoring criteria and making sure that that is written in a way that is observable and measurable for staff so that everyone is consistently scoring the behavior the same way. You'll also want to have identified rewards and criteria for earning. So it might be based on the number of points or the percentage of points that they earn, and then scheduled times for students to access those rewards. So when you're first starting out, maybe you have a time built in at midday for them to look at their points and cash in and get a prize from the prize box or a preferred activity. And then you might have another time scheduled at the end of the day for them to earn another reward. And then as students become familiar with this process, then maybe you go just to the end of the day, and then you can continue to fade out from there if you need to. Here are some examples of point sheets. So one is a report card for check-in, check-out. Another one is just a point sheet. But again, it does have the scoring criteria and it has the target behaviors on there. One thing that I would add, which it actually does have space on the bottom of the one on the right, is not just the behavior, but also the definition. What does the behavior look like for the student? So that staff can, number one, prompt if they are not engaging in that behavior, but number two, so that staff can identify and reinforce and accurately score that behavior too. Next, I'll talk about program-wide token systems. The goal with a program-wide token system is to maintain desired classroom behavior. It can be based on basic expectations of the classroom or program. It can be social skills related. It could be related to a lot of different things that you might be teaching with students and having them practice. So when you would use this is a classroom management tool that you can use to improve desired behavior across all students in the classroom or program. So what you would need to set up this type of system are, again, tokens, behavior expectations that are clearly defined with corresponding visuals. So again, you'll want to be able to talk about the behaviors, what they look like, how the students should be showing them, but then you might also want a visual to refer back to remind them what the expectations are. You'll also want a place for students to keep their tokens, a reward menu with items or activities, and then corresponding prices for those items and activities. And then a scheduled time when the students can access the store. So again, all the students are earning tokens, so there should be time when all of the students can purchase their reward that they would like to have. Here's some examples for program-wide token systems. So we've used raffle tickets in the past. We've also had pre-made cards or kind of tickets that students get that staff write specifically why they earned that ticket. So that's really important too. And then there are a couple examples of reward menus. When you're identifying rewards for the whole group, you do want to get that group input. So make sure that you take time and talk with your students, do some preference assessments, and see what are some things that they would want to earn. And I would also incorporate a variety of items, activities, maybe even privileges. You can be really creative with this and have a lot of variety within the menu. Then there is also a program-wide token system with group contingencies. So here, the group might be working together to earn a reward, and then there are different ways that you can set this up. So the three types of group contingencies that you can have are the dependent group contingency, where it might be one student, or I usually recommend selecting a group of students that are working together to earn a reward for the whole class. And if you look at this visual I have here on the right, that would be the hero procedure, where the reward for the group is determined on that small group of individual students that have been selected. There's also the independent, and that in the visual on the right is referred to as every man for himself. So it's a contingency that is presented to the whole group, and anyone who meets criteria gets the reinforcement. And then there's interdependent, and that's the most commonly used one. That's where the whole group is working together to earn a reward. And we've got program-wide point sheets that can correspond with level systems. So some of the programs in our member districts and also within 916 programs use point sheets that correspond to a level system. The goal here is to increase and maintain desired behavior over time. So when you would use this is with students who are motivated by earning extra privileges and students who can tolerate moving between levels and waiting to meet criteria to move up. So this might require a little bit more waiting and tolerating delay and reinforcement. This type of system is not appropriate for all students, but once they are at a point where they can understand, there's a certain number of days that they have to meet a criteria before they can move up a level, and they can have that conversation, then this might be an appropriate system for them. What you need in order to start this point sheet and level system reinforcement strategy is having behavior definition or expectations that are clearly defined with corresponding visuals. You'll want a point sheet for each student with scoring criteria. At least 4 levels with varying privileges, again, to allow for that movement and variety between levels. Criteria for moving between levels, so how many days do they start at the specific level before they can move up to the next one. And then a protocol for when criteria is not met or for automatic level drops. So that might be big behavior incidents like physical aggression or like elopement from the school, those types of things. So navigating how you're going to determine the level drop, it should be pre-planned so it doesn't seem arbitrary to the student. And then that information should also be shared with the students so that they understand that there is behavior that might result in an automatic level drop. Here are some examples of program-wide level systems. Both of these level systems are implemented in our in 2 of our member district programs. So one of them is a bronze, silver, gold, and platinum level, and then another one is based off of different habitats. So there's Arctic, desert, ocean, and rainforest. The visual on the right is a list of incentives. So when students reach the ocean level, these are the privileges and incentives they have access to at this level. Choosing systems that work. When we want to increase the behavior or we want to teach students a sequence of tasks or expand their ability to tolerate delay and reinforcement, we need to figure out which reinforcement system is going to work best. So some things that you want to consider for the students in your classroom or program are, do they need more frequent reinforcement? Are they struggling to follow simple routines? Are they able to comply with task demands? If so, how many? Because that's going to be where you want to start. Are they able to sustain attention to a task for periods of time? If so, how long? That gives you a good starting point. And are you working to increase independence with task completion? So once you've thought about some of those different components, and there are likely others that you'll want to think about and talk about as a team. You also want to ask yourself, what are behavior goals or classroom expectations for the students? And the most important thing to remember is how you implement each procedure. The reward that is provided needs to be worth it for the student. Again, there needs to be that consistency piece, so planning out what type of schedule you're going to use to provide the reinforcement, when that's going to happen, and what's available are all key components to having an effective reinforcement system. Training staff. So the biggest piece here is consistency. Consistency is key, especially if you want to have an effective reinforcement system. Staff might meet together to go through the procedure, to practice it. Staff should also model the system for either new staff or teachers that are first starting out using the system should model it, show staff how to do it. Provide feedback and accept feedback. So make sure that you're communicating as a team with regard to how the procedure is going, whether or not it's feasible to provide that reinforcement immediately when it's scheduled, and what modifications might be needed to make it more effective. You might also want to have a cheat sheet available with the basic steps or scoring criteria for staff and the team to refer back to. Again, it's very difficult to memorize every single individualized system. And so having a little cheat sheet or something else to refer back to that you have quick access to will be helpful in maintaining that consistency. The last thing I want to talk about is a fidelity check. So fidelity checks can improve consistency and help objectively identify growth areas for staff implementing new systems. There are checklists that you can use that have a list of the materials needed, the steps to be followed within the system, making sure that each component is touched upon by the staff member who's implementing that procedure. The nice thing about these fidelity checks is that staff can take turns providing their peers with feedback based on the checklist, or they can just rate their own skills and say, yeah, you know, I've definitely got these components in place. This is something that I really want to work on improving as far as the procedure goes. So I will open an example really quick of a fidelity checklist. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. So this one is a token system fidelity checklist. So you might have the date, the staff name, who is observing the staff, and then you have different sections. So there could be one with materials present or available, how staff set expectations, how they implement the procedure, how reinforcement is provided, and then maybe some miscellaneous feedback based on the structure of the reinforcement system you've created. And that concludes the reinforcement system presentation for today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I don't have it included on here, but it is jfrench@916schools.org. Thank you very much.